The Metamorphosis by Franz Kafka. You must understand, first off, that there is a precursor to Kafka. You see the word precursor on the board here. Precursor means a forerunner. And Kafka just didn't write that book and give it that title just out of nowhere, because there's another writer by the name of Ovid, a Roman Latin writer, and he wrote a very famous book called Metamorphoses, plural, and this is singular. Open your notes and let me tell you something about this book by Ovid, because it helps us to see what it is that Kafka's after. In the Metamorphoses by Ovid, a series of characters, something like maybe around 100, experience what are called transformations. These transformations you perhaps have heard something about from Greek mythology. Many times the transformations have a kind of what we'd call divine origin. I mean that the gods somehow provoked that transformation to take place. When the sun god Apollo is in love with a girl named Daphne, and he's chasing her and she's running from him, and just as he's about to lay his hands upon her, she turns into a tree, and so she escapes. But she is forever after then a tree. So you can see girls turning into trees. You can see all kinds of people turning into various kinds of animalistic sorts of things. Of course, there's a biblical precedent too, right? Because when Lot leaves Sodom, who's transformed? And into a pillar of salt. You see, there's a kind of transformation there. Now, look at the subject of the lecture on the board, Charles, and write it down, because this afternoon I would like to give you some idea about the intellectual background for this kind of transformation that we're talking about in Kafka. So the title of the lecture then is something like Precursors of the Modern Investigation of Consciousness. And you should understand that for people who've lived since the 19th century, that's ourselves, consciousness is the most important subject. And I think maybe we can begin by talking about Rimbaud, and he's a French poet who wrote all of his poetry by about the age of 19 or 20, and then he went to live in North Africa and never wrote another word. Some people say, or he claims himself, that he has committed artistic suicide. He won't write anymore. But what he did write while he was writing maybe is the first statement. It's in the 19th century, but it predicts what the 20th century is occupied with. Maybe it's the first statement about this attempt to expand consciousness. I assume you know what I mean, to expand consciousness. Does anybody in here ever thought about expanding their consciousness? If so, let me see your hand. No, you don't want to. Why not? Why won't I get any hands on that, Larry?
Yes, I haven't heard those terms.
Oh, sure they have. Yeah, sure. Yeah, there's little reasons why, though. People don't want to talk about expanding their consciousness. Why? Because it involves what? It certainly involves mystics, but there aren't very many mystics here.
It involves thinking.
Well, no, it doesn't really involve thinking either. It involves drugs. Right. Now, I've been told that about 2 or 3 years ago, there was a kind of revival of acid or LSD just in our section here. And people were going around with little pink pills you could take. And what would they do to you? Expand your mind, right? And right along from the very beginning of the concern to expand consciousness, there is this kind of drug input in the question, right from Rimbaud on. Now, the key phrase for Rimbaud, and I guess for almost all the later writers, is that you can expand your consciousness by doing this. by disordering it. And if you're thinking, oh, here it goes with this quantum theory again, then you're getting the right idea. Because quantum theory is a scientific kind of expansion of consciousness, but without the drug. Now, here's the central premise of the modern period, and this directly relates to Kafka. How can I, by disordering my mind, expand my consciousness? How would that work? Who's got an idea? How does that work? Disorder my mind. Let's take a case. Let's have pretend that it's dark and there's a candle up on the desk. And you come in and sit down and look at that candle. What do you see? Okay? Now just imagine the situation. What do you see? Well, you might see the candle flame flicker slightly because of a breeze. You might see the wax bead up on the side and roll down the side of the candle. If you're close enough, or if perhaps you need eyeglasses, then you tend to see a little halo around the candle flame. People who wear glasses, when they take them off, they don't see the stars, you know. What they see is a kind of ball of light, because it's diffused, because the eye is not accurate. Well, that would be standard. Now, how would a disordered mind view the candle that's burning there? See, that's the issue. So let's imagine somebody who's very drunk coming in the room, and they sit down next to the person who's in a totally ordinary state. What do they see when they look at the candle? Again, see, it's perhaps blurred. It's perhaps, write this down as the first point about disordering from a general way. Their eyes are unfocused. The eyes are unfocused. If I look at you with my eyes unfocused, what's the difference between what I see from when I look at you when my eyes are focused? I can focus on a student in the back of the room, and I see the definite image. Now, when I take my glasses off, I don't see any definite image at all. I just see a blur. Now, what we have to try to do is to imagine what an expanded consciousness would be like, so that we can appreciate what Kafka's doing. Is he trying to expand or narrow your consciousness here in this story? Does anybody want to be a bug? Raise your hand. Lewis. If Lewis doesn't come to class more often, we're going to turn him into a bug. See? And the same thing goes for, well, you know who. But you see, there's a word that's associated with this. They just don't say he's crazy. They say he's a this. It's a visionary. He's a visionary. And we have to deal with several authors who are visionaries in this section of the course. Well, it was Rimbaud's idea that he wanted to break out of the mold, the mental mold, what Blake calls the mental shackles, which bound him. He wanted to break out. So, this is what he says. Now I'm going in for debauch. You know what debauchery is? Drunkenness, partying, fooling, all the time, see? But at a very extreme level. Now I'm going in for debauch. Why? Why? Because I want to be a poet. And I am working to make myself a visionary. You won't possibly understand, and I don't know how to explain it to you, to arrive at the unknown through the disordering of all the senses. Write it down. That's the point. The sufferings will be tremendous, but one must be strong. Be born a poet. It is in no way my fault. So what Rimbaud is saying is that if, under the influence of some drug, he is caused to be viewed by society as being someone who's bad, someone who's crazy, he says, that's not my fault. Now, I think that right on the start of it, it's not too difficult for you to understand, John, that Kafka is trying to disorder whose consciousness? Is it his own or the reader's? First problem we have, okay? Is it the reader?
The reader.
All right, well,
Yeah.
okay, maybe it is. But what mental state is Kafka in when he writes this stuff? When we get the kind of statement, as Gregor Samasa woke one morning from uneasy dreams, he found himself transformed in his bed into a gigantic insect. A bug. Now, people feel very funny about bugs. They're scared of them. Listen. Give my book. Well, why does Kafka choose a bug? I mean, why can't he turn himself into a cow, huh? Why can't he turn himself into what do you like? A snake, a scorpion, a horse, a butterfly? Why bug? Okay, that's the first thing you need to think about. Why the bug? Let me read to you some more about this question of disordering the mind. Very, very important topic. Listen. The poet makes himself a visionary. Yeah, write it down. The poet makes himself a visionary through a long, rational disordering of all the senses. On to say, every form of love, of suffering, of madness, he searches for within himself. He consumes all the poisons that he can find in order to disorder his mind. Now, you see what we're going to be getting here then in the 20th century is the conscious production of madness in artists. Write it down. That's what it's about. The conscious production of madness in the self, if you like. And so if someone comes up to you when you're going home on the bus today, right, and they say to you, who was it that started the idea in the 20th century that to disorder the mind is to expand consciousness? Someone asks you that, what will you say? Rimbaud. When did Rimbaud live? Well, more than 120 years ago, about. And that's always the way you're going to find it. Any idea that comes to fruition in your own time is going to have its cause back 100 or so years in the past. Listen what Rimbaud says. Let me read to you. The rational disordering necessary to make the poet a visionary is not one that is natural but unnatural. Here's what he says. Rimbaud says, write this down, the soul must be made monstrous. And now we're getting close, right? The soul must be made monstrous. Is the bug a monster? Who thinks the bug is a monster? I'll bring a live bug. I'll bring a whole box of live. Don't you think Valerie, I would set a whole box of live bugs loose on you sometime? Am I capable of that? Trouble is catching them, you know. That's the problem. You just can't go down to the 7-Eleven and buy bugs by the box. The soul must be made monstrous, he says. No, he doesn't say the body, and he doesn't say the mind. He says the soul. How is the soul made monstrous? Answer that. How is the soul made monstrous? By what? A rational disordering of how many senses? How many are there? 5. Yeah, 5. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so here's the whole point. In order for my mind to be greater than it is, and who wants their mind to be greater than it is? Raise your hand. Well, do you trust me? The rest of them don't trust me enough because they know I'm going to trick them. Okay? So, who wants their mind to be greater than it is? See? And then I get some responses. But think of it in the Bible. Who wanted their mind to be greater than it was? Tell me. Tell me. Who in the Bible? Who wanted their mind to be greater than it was? Who wanted expanded consciousness in the Bible? I always got this answer in World War I. The devil. That's who wanted to have his mind expanded. Now, okay, you see, I'm just funning with you a little bit because there may be a legitimate area of mental expansion that should be open and naturally available to human beings, right? And yet there may be another area of mental expansion that would not be open to human beings because to expand their minds in that direction would make them what? Into what? Not evil. Monsters. So the question is evil good? Are madmen holy? And I could give you a dozen writers who entertain those propositions, and half of them are still alive. So you see, Kafka is very early. He writes this 1917. He's kind of early on presenting a personification of what? He's presenting the personification of what, Kafka? Well, yeah, okay. If you see, it's the pathetic fallacy when I attribute human attributes to nature, right? What is it when it goes the other way? When I make humanity into monsters or into animals. Well, okay, it's a kind of reversal of the pathetic fallacy, or maybe it's just a further instance of it, but you have to appreciate the intensity with which this idea that if I disorder my mind, my consciousness will be expanded. If I make my soul monstrous, I will know things other people have never known. You have to appreciate how strongly that is felt in the 20th century. But, of course, it's also true that poets, well, I read something, creative artists have something like 400 or 500% higher incidence of madness than do the other people who've been tested. They're naturally prone to it anyway. Now the question that we'll have to face, see, when we look at this and some other things, is on a basic level of values, do we believe that we should try to disorder our consciousness? That's the first question. Should I? And then, secondly, if you answer yes, then what are legitimate ways to do it and what are illegitimate ways to do it? Okay? Now, would it be, just for associating, would it be a legitimate way for us to get pieces of straw and go out into the woods and find an ant's nest? And, you know, the larvae are white, little pieces like grain. And would it be legitimate in our effort to expand our consciousness if we had lunch in the woods, very carefully lifting one piece of larva up on the piece of straw and putting it in our mouths and eating it? Because they taste all right. You can eat larvae. Would that be okay? Well, you see, there's certain kinds of, what do we say? A society legitimizes certain efforts to disorder consciousness, right? So how does society legitimatize one? Name one that society approves of. Drinking. Doesn't it? Doesn't it? If you took away the cigarettes and the alcoholic industry, what would happen to the GNP? Sure, it'd fall fast, too. What happened to the state of North Carolina? Do away with tobacco. Wow. Be a lot of people on relief, sure. So you see, society approves of drinking and smoking. What else does society approve of? Other ways to change your consciousness, disorder it if you like. How else can you do it? What? What? Read? Did he say read? Weed? Oh, drugs. Well, partly yes and partly no, yeah. But for the most part, no, society does not approve of marijuana, right? It's not legitimatized. Well, whatever, yeah. But what's another way besides marijuana? I wasn't thinking of marijuana at all. What? I'm talking about ways that society legitimatizes the attempt to disorder consciousness.
By meditation?
All right, good. By meditation, very fine, sure. It's okay to meditate, right? It's just that you don't do it, right? Who wants to meditate? You do? Well, I'll lead a meditation group. Sure, be glad to. Be good for me. Haven't done it in a while. What's another way to disorder the mind? You know, it's not a permanent thing, right? You always come back, don't you? When you get high tonight, what happens to you in the morning? Are you here again? Yeah, okay. So, see, it's temporary. What's another way to do it temporarily? Simple way. You pay $2.50 and you go where? To the movie. Sure. Does that disorder your mind? Does it expand your consciousness? Sometimes, yeah. There's some real bad movies that, you know, will really probably deaden you, may kill brain cells, but there's some good ones too. Pink Floyd, The Wall, great expansion, yeah.
What about a hypnotist?
Hypnotist doesn't do anything to you. I mean, you don't do it. He's doing it. But it is legitimatized. It's legitimatized. Yeah, hypnotism, sure. What's another way? Any joggers in here?
Yeah.
All right. Well, why do you jog?
For stress, any type of things on my mind I want to get off.
All right. It's a form of meditation. But what happens to a jogger when he pushes himself? His body produces what? Yeah, you said it. The body produces endorphin, which is a drug, and it makes you feel real good. I used to run, just floating along, you know. Right, hey, please, one at a time. Yes.
That's the reason why we run up the Redbird and what's more. It doesn't hit until you've been running a while, right?
You got to work on it. Yeah, you got to push it, but then it comes. Yeah, sure. Okay. Now, please, class, please. There's a lot of people. Let's come back. I know this is a sort of sensational thing I'm talking about. It tends to produce a discussion. But look, those are all legitimate ways to disorder the mind. And society approves of them. Now, you see, what about heroin? And what about cocaine? And what about morphine? And what about gun running? You see, I changed on you. Gun running, is that approved by society? No. Gun running is selling guns to bandits. You know, you never thought that people did that, but people do that. Okay, but look. What does the gun runner feel when he's going through the blockade of boats to land his packet of guns on the beach? How does he feel? Rimbaud was a gun runner. That's why I bring it up. How does he feel? Oh, yes, very stimulated, very excited. Any man that has a dangerous job loves that job because of what? You're so alive when you're 100 feet off the ground that when you come down, you just feel like it's just not happening. See, any job like that gives you this tremendous rush, again, of naturally generated adrenaline. It's your own blood that produces it, your own brain. But look a little more deeply. What do we do with people whose minds get disordered? Now, don't answer that because I know you know and I know. We what? We institutionalize them. What's a nice way of saying what? Send them to the where? Okay, yeah, to the loony bin, to Terrell. I've been to Terrell. Yeah, I was a visitor. You know, when I went to Terrell, they took me back in the lockup. See? And as I was coming out, I wasn't supposed to be back there, but as I was coming out, this old guy, he comes running up to me, And the woman, she was afraid. And he put his arm around me and he says, "Can I talk to you for a minute?" And I said, "Sure." And then he told me 3 or 4 secrets about his married life and some other things. And I give him a hand. Because I knew that he was going to get pounded on if he didn't get back in the cage. So I took his hand like this and I said, "God bless him." And he felt just right. See, people like that are on the same kind of high that the guy who works 100 feet off the ground is on. But he can come and they can't. Well, they didn't used to. Now they can because we have these drugs, see, and we can make them normal. Now, see, that's another kind of drug. If I take a drug to disorder my consciousness, okay, that's one thing. But now, if I'm a doctor, of course I am a doctor, but not that kind, I can give you a drug to order your consciousness. So you can go up and you can come down. Well, with all these people going up and coming down, this gets to be a pretty ordinary thing, right? I mean, everybody knows what it's like to be stoned, right? So it's not unusual. So being stoned today is now the equivalent of normal consciousness. So now, to expand your consciousness from 1984 is a very different proposition than it is to expand it from 1917 or from the point of view of Rimbaud in the middle of the 18th century in France or in North Africa. Is it good? Write it down. Or is it bad? And that's a real problem. You want your children to be doing what you're doing? Anybody? Valerie? Yes or no? Yes or no? Yes or no, Valerie?
Yeah, no.
Okay, well, I kind of suspected that probably most of you feel that, well, you're free and you're young and you want to be involved in things that are happening now. Still, looking at it from the point of view of your own children, you'll be wise enough to say, well, probably you can do without it, I mean, it probably won't hurt you not to, disorder your mind the way we used to. Because this is a passing thing, right? The middle class in America has only been getting stoned for how long?
20 years.
Well, yeah, about 20 years. Yeah. Now, that doesn't mean Indians, right? You know that the American Indians used to practice the thing called a vision quest. And this was another way to disorder the mind. It's one way that you haven't mentioned. The best way to disorder your mind, if you really want to get there, is to fast. Fasting produces this. Has anyone ever fasted 3 days? Oh, well. How'd you feel at the end of the 3rd day? Kim.
Crazy.
Not crazy. You felt, first of all, he felt light. He felt buoyant. See? And secondly, was he hungry?
No.
He wasn't hungry. And I had a headache the first day, and maybe part of the second day, but not the 3rd day, did it? Why did he start eating again? Didn't that just mess it up? He took all that pain to get there, and on the 3rd day, he starts eating again. That's the dumbest thing he ever did. Why didn't you keep going? Well, why not?
He wanted to come down.
He wanted to come down. Why did he want to come down? Because he thought other people wanted him to come down. That's why, right? Your doctor, your mother, your wife, your husband. They want you to come back and be like who? Everybody else. Yeah. Now, see, this kind of thing leads us into areas that it's difficult for us to talk about. It's just that we have to if we're going to make sense of the 20th century's attempt to disorder the mind. Now, I gave you some scientific background for it, quantum theory. And that's done, right? And it's on tape somewhere. And that's available. But now, see, we're looking at it more from a literary point of view. And these poets tried to go beyond their birthright. Is that good or bad? You see, if you say it's bad, then you tend to cut humanity off from all kinds of weird experiments. But if you say it's good, your children might be doing it. So you see, it's hard to draw a line in any particular place. I have on the board some references for you to write down and check out. Rimbaud's Illuminations. It's a short book. It's of course in translation. If you're going to buy one book this semester, I recommend then get to it. I hope somebody gets some of these books. You don't want to keep going. You're just going to end up being pigeons and sheep. You have to read these people. This J.K. He's French too. His name is Huysmans. I can't remember the name of the book, but something like the Banquet of something. And in there, this man does all kinds of interesting things. You'll like the book. This book you know about, I think, because it was a movie. Paddy Chayefsky, or Chayefsky. I'm not sure I spelled it right. Who saw the film Altered States 3 years ago? Just 2 people left. Only the 2 or 3 residual hippies in the class saw that movie, right?
That's right there.
Yeah. Well, look, in that film, you get a chance to see what expanded consciousness is, and it's quite a thing to see, but the film won't be back, unfortunately. And then here, this is a book if you really want to take on it was written in about 1972, McKenna, The Invisible Landscape. If you really want to take on some of the most interesting, but also maybe the most difficult book you'll ever read, check it out of the library. Don't buy it. It's in downtown Dallas. They'll send it out to Highland Hills. And what I want to do is read to you something that McKenna produced and discovered in their attempt to disorder their consciousness. And it relates to what? The bug. Okay? The bug is what kind of animal, by the way? It's not an animal, it's an insect. Yeah. What these guys did, they went to South America, they're anthropologists, to explore some of the hallucinogenic drugs that are produced in essentially the Amazon jungle. What is one of those? Do you know any of these? Hallucinogenic drugs. What? No. LSD is a synthetic one. These are natural substances that come from mushrooms and cactus and vines. No, that's not hallucinogenic. It's sulfuric. Let me just say it this way, that the Banisteriopsis and some of the mushrooms that they found have been used by the medicine men in these tribes who live in the jungle, well, ever since, right? For a very, very long period of time. And the purpose that the medicine man, or maybe the curandero we would call him now, the purpose that he has is if someone comes to him who's sick, he's the doctor, but he doesn't have any of our miracle drugs. What he has is the way that they have discovered to treat sickness. And so the person comes who's sick and the doctor gets high. That's what happens. But you see, why he gets high is so as to diagnose what's wrong with the person who's sick. A lot of times it's felt by these people that there are interfering spirits, and this gives him spiritual vision. See, he can then see the invisible world. He can see the invisible landscape. Well, in any case, McKenna, 2 young American folklorists, go down to South America and they take the drugs. And they really get way far, far, far out from anything that I've read before. And here's what they find is true of the spiritual entities that they see. This is what they see. Now, it's interesting because it connects to Kafka. Here's a quote now. This is what they saw. Some invisible hyperspatial entity, its seeming accentuation of themes alien, insectile, and futuristic, the role of the presence was somehow like that of an anthropologist come to give humanity the keys of galactarian citizenship. We discussed this entity in terms of a giant insect. And so, McKenna, when they disordered their minds, had a vision of the bug. What they say is that the insect world, talk about far out, they say that the insect world, properly understood, should be viewed as an extraterrestrial presence on the earth. Well, what do you say? They're what? Okay, yeah. From the ordinary point of view of society, what society legitimatizes, right? They're crazy. But of course you can see the society's fashions are going to change, and it may be in 100 years or it may be next year that they'll, well, maybe they got a point, right? Have you noticed John Lilly? He's communicating with dolphins. Dolphin has a bigger brain than human. They're computerizing dolphin speech so we can talk to the dolphin. There'll be something on this decade. I've been following Lilly for a while. But you see, if we can talk to the dolphin, why would we want to? About who? I tipped it. We would learn who we are. You see, that's our problem. We don't know who we are. The only way you can know who you are is if someone different, but also intelligent, comes to you and tells you who you are. That's why everybody's waiting for the little space people to land, don't you see? But Lilly's taking the point of view that if we can talk to the dolphin's as intelligent or more so than we are. The dolphin can tell us who we are, and we don't need E.T. All of these efforts, which now you're beginning to see permeate modern culture to some degree, all these efforts come from Rimbaud's attempt to rationally disorder the mind and make himself a visionary, to see that which has never been seen before, to go where no man, Star Trek. But not Star Trek outside, Star Trek inside. Therefore, 20th century literature, it gets very interesting if you just can, now begin to work with the concepts that you're being presented with. Very interesting. And if you're satisfied with being a 19th century person, wonderful. There's only one problem. What's that? What happened to the 19th century? It's gone. And as a matter of fact, I think we saw when we looked at Ode to Autumn, there's nobody in the room here who could function in the 19th century, because you don't know the terms, you don't know the plants, you don't know the way of life. So you're pretty much stuck now in 1984, and you pretty much then have to go forward because you know you can't go back, and it's awful hard to stand still. And this is the track that's been mapped out for you by the poets and the thinkers who are presumably they're our leaders. I dare say that no one's ever thought of it in quite that way, right? The people who are setting the tone, where American society is going, is determined by Kafka, or McKenna, or Rimbaud, or Huysmans, Allen Ginsberg, or any of the many other kinds of Sylvia Plath or Hemingway. These are all people who disordered their minds one way or another. When you go to church, are you trying to disorder your mind?
Yeah.
Well, you do want from church an emotional experience, isn't it so? If you go to church and nothing happens to you, what do you tell yourself? Well, either it's not a good church, or I'm not saved, or something's missing. Okay? Something's missing. The Spirit's not there.
Okay.
All right, your question?
In most cases, like when one meditates or prays, more or less sense of disorder, but yet spiritually you trying to communicate with God.
Well, I like what you're trying at, that you're trying to get somewhere. The question was, when you go to church, do you disorder your mind? Well, my own feeling is yes and no. Mostly no. But there may be a possibility of expanding consciousness through now ordering the mind. The mind has been disordered for you. You've got disordered minds when you're born, isn't it so? Do you have lots of thoughts all the time? Do you? Yes. Well, that's disorder. What would happen if you really were to order the mind? Is that the Christian experience? Is it ordering or disordering? Again, don't answer that because it requires a great deal of thought to make your way through these difficult questions. And there isn't any one answer. What was Jesus trying to do? Disorder the minds or order the minds of the Pharisees? He tried to disorder them. So he went around eating grain on the Sabbath. He went around healing people on the Sabbath. Was he disordering their minds? Why?
Because he was doing contrary to the
Well, okay, he wanted to expand their consciousness. Today we say raise their consciousness. He wanted to show them what true righteousness was. And they were following the ordered way, and so he disordered it in an attempt to have them break out. Unsuccessful, right? But he made an effort. And you can turn that coin around. When Jesus returns, you know the Bible teaches that the Lord will return to the earth. When the Lord returns to the earth, is he going to order or disorder the minds? Well, why, Charles, can't we be left alone without being asked all these silly and impossible to answer questions, right? Well, when the Lord returns to the earth, is he going to order or disorder the minds? All right, why to order? Why? Well, that won't answer it. When he comes, what's he going to do to the earth the second time? A rule of what? A rule of judgment and what? Iron. It's a rule of iron. Is that order or disorder? He's going to order. First he disordered, now he's going to order. It's hard to keep up with him. Question?
Okay, why says the
The Lord comes back to the earth. There'll be a lot of people going around saying, well, he's in our church. Come on Sunday, you can meet him. And, various things of that. Well, look, come back with me to the question that we have in hand. And that is this. Listen. Who began? This is what I'm after. I want you to get this. Who began this whole idea that to disorder the mind is to expand consciousness? Who started that idea? Rimbaud. Yeah. And then after that, everybody jumps on the bandwagon. Edgar Allan Poe is another early precursor of this disordering facility. You've read some of his little stories, I think. You see what I mean? The Gold Bug and other things. Now, if you read your notes to your roommate tonight, and you say, well, the doc said that Rimbaud said that he was going to debauch himself and therefore increase his consciousness, let's go get drunk. See? But your roommate will say, I'm already drunk. Now look, see, the problem here is, what happens in a society where all the people already are debauched? Then what is it to disorder the mind?